Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf ayin aleph. We started on daf ayin with a case of an animal that had a dead fetus inside. It was stillborn, and the shepherd put his hand in, and then we said that whether it's a kosher animal, whether it's not a kosher animal, there's no tuma nevela for this fetus. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said, no, there is. It's only not in a kosher animal. A kosher animal, there's no tuma of nevela, of a carcass, but there is in a non-kosher animal. So then we have the sources. What is the source of each one, right? Tanakama, it was based on a va-chomer. If the mother could protect it, right, then obviously if we could protect it from being kosher, right, the slaughter of the mother creates a situation ben beluah, then for sure the mother protects it from having this impurity of a carcass. And then we said, what about by behema tme'ah? And then we said, ki yamut min behema asher hi lachem lochla, even though that sounded like when an animal dies, which is a kosher animal, the when the animal dies, we understand to mean non-kosher. And the second part is kosher. And from there, we compare the two. Then we had the pasuk for Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Why does he say that in an impure animal, it is going to be impure, the fetus? So either we learned it from the one about the holech al kapav, bechol chaya, inside, right, as a non-kosher animal, inside another animal that walks on all four, meaning again, not split hooves, inside and not split hooves. And then we got into this problem with the pig. So because we got into the problem with the pig, we had to bring another pasuk. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak brought the pasuk about the ola v'yored, right, where it said specifically if you touch a carcass of a non-kosher animal or a non-kosher undomesticated, right, domesticated, non-domesticated, and it was all about non-kosher. And they said, but it would be the same whether you touched a kosher carcass. So both carry impurity. There must be some case where there's a difference between kosher and non-kosher, and that must be the fetus. Okay, that was the whole first part. Then we got to this braita where Rabbi Yonatan said, I got into this discussion with Ben Azai, and I said to him, we have a pasuk. Okay, now we're just going off track for a minute. He said, we have a pasuk about a non-kosher. Okay, I'll just read from the beginning. Namti lo leben Azai. Lamanu nevelat behema tahara shemitama. Unevelat behema tmea shemitama. Nevelat chaya tmea shemitama. Okay, there's four options, right? There's nevela of a kosher domesticated animal and a non-kosher domesticated animal. Nevela of a kosher, non-kosher domesticated animal. Then we have nevela of a carcass of a kosher non-domesticated animal and a non-kosher non-domesticated animal. So now what he basically says is the fact that a carcass carries impurity of all these types, I get them all except for one. In other words, one is mentioned in ki yamut min behema asher hi lachem lochla. That's a kosher animal, and that says the nevela is impure. Then we have the pasuk of the ola v'yored, which mentions the carcass of a behema and the carcass of a chaya, of a non-kosher. So that gets you non-kosher and domesticated, non-domesticated, and kosher domesticated. But what about a chaya, which is not kosher? To which he tried a pasuk, the one about the bechol chaya, which he said, no, that's talking about the fetus. Can't explain that pasuk that way. So he says, okay, well, what does Yishmael, your teacher, say? In other words, after Rabbi Yonatan asked Ben Azai, and Ben Azai came up with an answer, but Rabbi Yonatan rejected it, then he says to Rabbi Yonatan, well, what does your rabbi say? And Rabbi Yonatan answers, which is interesting because it means Rabbi Yonatan knew the answer from the beginning. Okay, maybe he was trying to test Ben Azai. Maybe he was trying to see if Ben Azai had something else to say. I think he was maybe hoping for some other pasuk or some other explanation. So when he asked him, what does your rabbi say? Namti lo. I said to him, V'chi yamut min behema. Now remember how, and this is part of the reason why I reviewed, that pasuk that has when an animal dies, which is an animal that you can eat, which sounded like it was only talking about kosher animals. The drasha was it's actually talking about kosher and non-kosher, and it's domesticated. So he says, V'chi yamut min behema zo behema tmea. Asher hi lachem lochla zo behema tahara. So we got from that one pasuk, kosher and non-kosher, again, in the world of drasha, because it's definitely not the simple reading, kosher and non-kosher domesticated animals. And then he just says very simply, Lamanu chaya bichlal behema, behema bichlal chaya. And by the way, we can say that the word behema includes chaya. So, and sometimes the word chaya includes behema. So, basically, right, sometimes the Torah uses an undomesticated animal. It really means also domesticated. And sometimes it uses domesticated. It means also undomesticated. Remember the difference, right? I mean, we've talked about this, but I'll remind you. domesticated animals are shor, seh, right? The ones who are, first of all, the ones that we always bring as korbanot, but the ones that live in, right, people have, they use them for working and things like that. I mean, I guess you can say some of the others also, but they're generally in someone's farm, okay, as opposed to the undomesticated, which are usually out in the wild, okay, like the deer and like those kind of animals. So anyway, he says, well, once you have that one pasuk, which includes kosher and non-kosher animals, you can get from there undomesticated animals as well. That's Rabbi Yishmael. And then, but he goes on, and he says like this. So you have chaya bichlal behema, and you have behema bichlal chaya. Chaya bichlal behema means the word behema can include a chaya, and the word chaya can include a behema. So chaya tahara bichlal behema tahara, and chaya tmea bichlal behema tmea. So then he spells it out. So the chaya tahara, the undomesticated kosher animal, is derived from the domesticated kosher animal, in the words asher hi lachem lo'ochla, which you eat. Right? And chayat me'ah bichlal behemat me'ah. And ki yamut min behema, we said, means a non-kosher. And from there, you can get to non-kosher chaya. Okay. And now he says even more. Behemat me'ah bichlal chayat me'ah. He spells everything out. He says, right, it wasn't, he was quoting Rabbi Yishmael. It wasn't necessarily talking about our particular topic. He says, in general, behemat me'ah could be included in a chayat me'ah. The pasuk talks about a chayat me'ah, there's going to be 4 permutations, right, where you have behema Torah, which includes chaya Torah. We have chaya Torah, which includes behema Torah. We have chayat me'ah, which includes behema me'ah, right? Non-kosher. It'll include a non-kosher domesticated. And we can have behema Torah bichlal chaya Torah. We can have a kosher undomesticated animal, which could include a kosher domesticated animal. Okay, so basically everything can include everything. That's what Rabbi Yishmael says. Later we're going to see, okay, where do we have each of these cases and what do they teach you? Okay, but we'll get to that in a minute. This is just quoting Rabbi Yishmael. And as soon as Ben Azai heard this, Balashon Azai Amarli, in this language he responded to me, Chavala Ben Azai Shalosh Yemeshet Rabbi Yishmael. Wow, chaval for me that I wasn't a student of Rabbi Yishmael when he was still alive. I lost out, because what a gadol. Now, why this particular statement made him, I mean, we've seen a million statements of Rabbi Yishmael, why this odd Ben Azai is an excellent question. I don't have an answer, but that's the response. Okay, now we want to go through, where do we see all these psukim? So, chaya bichlal behema minalan. And how do we know that when it says behema, it could also mean chaya? Well, there's the very obvious pasuk of dichtiv. Zot ha-behema asher tochlu. This is the animal that you should eat, meaning these are the kosher animals. This is in Sefer Dvarim when it lists the kosher animals. Shor, sek, ksavim. Okay, those are really behemot. Ox, goat, and a sheep. Ayal, vitzvivi, achmor. Okay, and then it continues to list the ram and the deer and the yachmor. I forget what the translation is, but these are all undomesticated animals. Now, haketzad. Okay, maybe it's from a chamor. I don't think so. I think it's, I don't know if someone can help me. But anyway, these are 3 undomesticated animals, and it introduces them by saying these are the behemot that you can eat. Okay, so anyway, haketzad. Okay, it's another kind of deer, an unknown type. Okay, there we have it. Okay, haketzad. Chaya bichlal behema. So how can you say this? Because a chaya is included in the word behema here. That's very clear. Behema bichlal chaya minalan. Now, how do you know? In other words, we're going to do 2 parts here. The first thing we're going to do is, how do you know that the word behema includes chaya, which we just proved? How do we know the word chaya includes behema? And then we're going to say, where do we have psukim where one includes the other, and there's halachic ramifications to it? Okay, so that's the more important. Let's get practical. But right now, we're in the realm of, where do we get it from? So how do you know that the word chaya can include behema? And that's also by kashrut. Dichtiv, zot ha-chaya asher tochlu mikol ha-behema asher al haaretz kol mafresa parsa. Haketzad behema bichlal b'chaya. So when it starts saying this is the chaya that you can eat, and it gives you the type of things you have to be looking for, well, that also we know is true for animals. So there you know that chaya, the word chaya there clearly includes behema. So now we're going to say chaya Torah bichlal behema Torah l'simanim. Okay, why is a chaya Torah included in behema Torah? What's the relevance? Now we get to the relevance factor for simanim, for the signs of a kosher animal. Okay, so when it says for a behema, these are the signs of a kosher animal, you know that's true for a chaya as well. Chaya tmea bichlal behema tmea. Okay, so now we say a chaya tmea, a non-kosher chaya, is included in a non-kosher animal. What is that relevant for? Laharba'ah. Okay, this, by the way, doesn't have to be chaya tmea. This is any animal. Okay, so the commentaries talk about that, but it's not just non-kosher. This is a prohibition that applies to all animals, but I guess it's also for non-kosher, as opposed to simanim of kosher animal, obviously only for kosher. But the pasuk says, "Behemtecha lo tarbia kilayim." You're not allowed to crossbreed two different kinds of animals, which is true even in non-kosher animals. And it says, "Behemtecha." Well, there the word behema also includes chaya, and if you were to do it with a chaya, crossbreed chayot, two different types of chayot, undomesticated animals, you'd be obligated as well. Okay, that's what we get. Those are the relevance. That's the relevance for the fact that behema includes chaya, both for simanim of kosher animals and for crossbreeding. Now we need to do the other two. Behema tme'a bichlal chaya tme'a l'chider Rebbe. Okay, why? This is one's a little bit different. Okay, a behema tme'a is included in a chaya tme'a, as we see from this drasha of Rebbe. Now the way it's going to work is like this. Now this is the drasha of Rebbe we made reference to yesterday in the pasuk of the Olav Yoreh, where it mentions, remember, chayot and behemot not kshirot, okay, not kosher ones. So Ditanya, Rebbe Yomer, Ekani chaya, behema lama ne'emra. Now the premise of Rebbe's drasha is that we don't need the word behema tme'a in the pasuk, because we already could have learned it from chaya. So there's already your answer. Chaya, if chaya includes behema, well, that means that those words are unnecessary, and Rebbe is going to use the words behema tme'a to get to a different drasha. Okay? So it's not that we're learning some halacha from it, we're learning some other halacha from it, but from the fact that the words are unnecessary, because you could have just learned behema from chaya. So now, what does he do? Remember, we talked about this pasuk yesterday. What's the problem with the pasuk? The pasuk says you're supposed to bring a sliding scale sin offering. If you do what? According to the simple reading of the pasuk, O nefesh asher tiga b'chol davar tameh, if you touch anything impure, okay, whether it's a nevela chayat tmeah, nevela behema tmeah, nevela sheretz tameh, okay, carcass of a dead undomesticated, carcass of a dead domesticated animal, carcass of a dead sheretz, creepy crawler, v'ne'elam mimenu v'hu tameh v'ashem, and you forget, and you're guilty. You did it accidentally. What did you do accidentally? You became impure accidentally? First of all, it's no sin to become impure. It's just a status impurity, but it's not a sin to become impure. So what are we talking about? Why would you bring a sin offering for just becoming impure to a carcass? That doesn't make any sense. So what does Rebbe say? Rebbe says, behema lama ne'emra. So since I can already learn behema from chaya, what do we have behema for? Well, it's for what we call a gzera shava. Behema tme'a appears here, and behema tme'a appears somewhere else. Let's see. Ne'emar kan behema tme'a, v'ne'emar lahalan behema tme'a. Where does it say that? Well, it's in pasuk in Vayikra Perek, chapter 7, verse 21. V'nefesh ki tiga b'chol tameh. If a person touches, same idea here, anything tameh, b'tumat adam o b'behema tme'a. Okay, there's your words, behema tme'a, the same words that appear in our pasuk. So either you touch a person who's impure, or you touch an animal who's impure, right? A carcass of a dead animal, o b'chol sheketz tameh. Ve'achal mi basar zevach hashlamim, and then you went ahead and what did you do? You ate sanctified meat from a shlamim. Asher la'Hashem v'nichrita nefesh h'ime'ameha. If you do it on purpose, you get karet. So now what do they say? Since in that pasuk, malalan tumat kodesh, you ate sanctified item while you were impure. Avkan tumat kodesh. Our pasuk must be referring to the same thing. Even though our pasuk doesn't say, and you ate kodshim, or you went into the temple, obviously that's what it means. Because there's no sin in just being impure to a carcass. The sin is, while you're impure, you forgot and you went into the temple, or you ate sanctified items. So that's when you're going to get karet if you did it on purpose. That's in Vayikra chapter 7. And in Vayikra chapter 5, it's talking about if you accidentally did it, then you bring a sin offering. And that's what the words behema tme'a are used for. And why were you able to darshan the gzera shava? Because those words were unnecessary. Why were they unnecessary? Because you could have learned behema from chaya. And that's the third case here. Okay, where we have a kosher animal, a non-kosher animal. The word non-kosher undomesticated includes domesticated. Okay. Next, last one. Behema Torah bichlal chaya Torah. If it makes reference to a chaya that's kosher, it can also mean a behema that's kosher. Li yitzira. Okay, what is li yitzira? So yitzira, we think about its creation. Well, we go back to Perek, to the beginning of Maseh Breshit. Now, in Maseh Breshit, when the world was created, it uses the word vayitzer, and God created, when it talks about Adam. And it also uses the word vayitzer when it talks about a chaya. But when it talks about a behema, it says vayas, not vayitzer. And he did rather than he created. So, because of that, they're going to get to Rabbi Meir's position anyway, is going to explain the following halacha. Okay. If we talked about before that maybe you found a camel that had a cow inside of it, or we had an animal that had a bird inside of it, right? Something that looked like a bird. Now we're going to have another weird case. Ditnan, it says in the Mishnah, Nida hamapelet min behema chaya va'of. We have a woman who miscarries, a creature that looks like, instead of it looking like a human fetus, it looked like an animal, domesticated, or undomesticated, or a bird. Bein tmeim, bein torim, whether it looks like a kosher one or a non-kosher one. Im zachar, if it was male, teshev l'zachar. Now, a woman who gives birth or miscarries from a certain stage of, not the very early stages, but a later stage, has all the laws of impurity of leida. Okay. Impurity of leida works like this, or blood of leida. The first 7 days, whether she's bleeding or not, if it was a male, she's impure. Any blood she sees is impure blood, and she's in a state of impurity. For a female, it's 14 days. But then the blood after day 7, if it's a male, and after day 14, if it's a female, from the male, from day 8 until day 40, any blood she sees is called dam tohar. What does it mean? Well, she can't go into the temple and eat sanctified meat if she has blood then, but she's permitted to her husband. Okay, there's no prohibition against relations with husband during those times, because it's called dam tahor. It's actually weird, right? Dam is usually tameh. This blood is blood that's pure. If it's a female, it's from day 15 until day 80, 66 days, where she is dam tohar. Okay, so now if you miscarry, if you know it's male, you have to wait those 7 days, and then you're also in that status up to day 40. Which again, if you were to see blood, it's fine, not a problem for your husband, but it's a problem for the temple. So now, and if it's female, that, and if it's you don't know either one, you have to be strict in both ways, which is, well, it's actually there's a stringency in the male, because any blood you see during the time of dam tohar is actually you're permitted to your husband. But normally, if you see blood, you're not. So from day 41 to day 80, if you're not sure if it's male or female, you have to be strict like the female, and you're in a status, strict like a male, and you're in the status dam of, it's not tohar. So it's a problem. Okay, it's a problem for relations with your husband. So there's chomers on both sides. So anyway, the point being, if you have this miscarriage of a min behema chaya or of, bein tmeim bein torim, whether they're kosher or not kosher species, im zachar teshev l'zachar, im nikeva teshev l'nikeva, eino yadua teshev l'zachar u'nikeva divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, you basically have to be concerned. Now, here's the key. Here's the yitzirah. Because it says vayitzer et chaya, so the behema is included in the chaya, and the laws are going to be the same whether if a person, right, the laws of, we're basically making a comparison. Since God created in the language of yitzirah, the chaya, then if a human gives birth to a chaya or miscarries a chaya, you're going to have the same laws as vayitzer et ha'adam. Okay? And then, but it only says it by chaya, not by behema. What do you see here? Rabbi Meir learns from chaya to behema. And that's the case. The chachamim disagree. They say, kol she'eino mitzurat adam eino vlad. Okay, they say, if it's not tzurat adam, it's not a vlad, and they disagree. But the point is, Rabbi Meir was what we were looking for. And with that, we end the sugya of the conversation with Rabbi Yonatan and Rabbi Yishmael, because what we did in this section was we explained the 4 permutations of, first we said, how do we know behemaz b'chlal chaya and chayaz b'chlal behema, and that we proved from psukim. And then we said, and what are the 4 ramifications? We had simanim, that's what you learned from behema tahara. From behema tme'ah, you learned kelayim, right, that it applies also to chaya. Then we had the behema tme'ah could be learned from chaya tme'ah, and that's why it was unnecessary in that pasuk, and that's why we learned from there. It's about eating kodshim. And the 4th is the issue of the yitzirah, that we learn the behema from the chaya. Okay, now we're going to move to one last question before we move to the next Mishnah. Going back now to the beginning. So we have this machloket, Rabbi Yossi Aglili and the rabbis, and the rabbis proved their position from Rav Chisda's va-chomer. And then, right, and then from that, drashach mina behema, right, it's talking about behema tme'ah and behema tahara. Then we said, what's the proof for Rabbi Yossi Aglili? We first brought that pasuk of Rabbi Yitzchak, Holech al kapav, but then in the end we really ended with that pasuk of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak of the Olav-Yoreh pasuk where it mentions Nivelat Me'av, the chaya, the behema, and why doesn't it mention Torah? There must be a case where there's a difference in a fetus, okay, between kosher and not kosher, which was Rabbi Yossi Glili's position. So l'Rabbanan haikra lamali. What do the rabbis do with that pasuk? So the answer, kulei l'chedi Rebbe huda'ata, exactly as we suggested yesterday. We said that's not the case. According to because we were in Rabbi Yossi Glili, according to the rabbis, don't get hung up on the nevelah, chayat me'ah, and chayat Torah and all that. The chayat, and why does it mention chayat me'ah and behema me'ah? To tell you this gzera shava to get to that it's talking about kodshim, and eating kodshim or going into the temple, and that's what that pasuk is used for. Don't darshan anything else from it. Okay, and that's a sort of simple answer. It doesn't really address everything because you really still have the same problem, which is why does it mention non-kosher and doesn't mention kosher? But that's a possible direction. Okay, new Mishnah. What we're going to do here is we're going to learn a Mishnah that's parallel but different to the previous Mishnah. Instead of it being an animal that's struggling and having a stillborn, it's going to be about a woman. Okay, and the laws of impurity we're going to see here are different. Okay, and then we're going to get into the Gemara into something called tuma belua. Okay, tuma that's inside the body of someone, which you can imagine because that's what we're talking about, an ubar that's in the body of someone, a fetus. But we're going to ignore our Mishnah for right now, and only at the top of tomorrow's daf they bring up our Mishnah. Okay, so we're kind of getting into a completely different sugya, which overlaps, and the overlap is going to come later. Okay, not in today's daf. So we have Isha shemet vlada b'toch me'ah. We have a woman who's, unfortunately, she has a stillborn, and pashta chayat yada. You see exactly what Tosfot was talking about. In the previous Mishnah, it was the ro'eh, the male shepherd, and here it's the female that we talked about yesterday. Here the female midwife comes, a chaya is a midwife. Pashta et yada, she puts in her hand, vinag abo, right, to take out the fetus, and a chayat me'at tumat shiva. Okay, as soon as she touches the fetus, she is now impure 7 days. Okay, classic tumat meat. So here you see the comparison. The animal ubar was not tameh, but the human ubar is. However, ha'isha, but the woman who has this dead fetus inside her, ad sheyetzei avlad, ashat tahara, she is pure. The fact that she has a fetus inside her that's dead, that doesn't make her impure. The midwife's hand touching it makes her impure. The woman's not. When does she become impure to the dead? When the fetus comes out, because as it's coming out, it touches her body and then it makes her impure. But while it's inside, it's not. And that's going to lead us to a whole sugya about a tuma called tuma belua, okay, which is a swallowed tuma. Okay? Two very interesting shiurim that are up on our site beyond the daf. One is din and daf about tuma in general. Is tuma physical or is it symbolic? Or is it some sort of combination? Is there something physical actually going on? And Alana tries to show from our sugya, you could see theoretically there is something physical going on. Okay, we're going to talk about that, we'll get to it later, with those source uses. Or is it really symbolic, or is it some combo of the two? That's an interesting shir. The other is gefet, which isn't up yet in English, but should be up hopefully later today, which is about a woman. Okay, the whole gefet is based on this machloket Rashi Tosfot at the very end of our daf. But the end of the shir is all about, it's up in Hebrew on our side already with Rabbi Nichana Dreyfus. Shalhevet Schwartz says the English, so that'll be up on the English side. But anyway, it's about a Kohen's wife who goes pregnant to a cemetery. Is she allowed? Because she has a fetus inside, because we're going to talk about tuma going out, which is our Mishnah, and tuma going in. Right? If something's in the body, does the tuma go in from the outside? And the question is, does that question relate to our sugya, or maybe there's other issues at stake there, or maybe there's other reasons to permit? And okay, the general kivun is to say yes, she can, but the question is why, and it comes from our sugya, a very, very interesting question. Okay, and anyway, that's gefet for today. So let's start with our Gemara. Amar Rabba, kashem shetumah belua ina mitama, kach tahara belua ina mitama. Okay, this is a big statement. It's going to take us to the whole daf. Okay, just like tahara belua. Now, that's what I said. There's two directions. There's tuma that's in your body, and it doesn't make you tameh. Okay, so just like tuma belua, if you have something tameh that you swallow, it doesn't it doesn't mitame you. Okay, we're going to talk about what this means in a minute. Kach tahara belua, if you swallow something pure and you become impure, eina mitama, it doesn't become tame. Okay, meaning basically whatever's in your body is in your body. That's separate. It's not affected. It doesn't affect you, and it's not affected by you. Okay, that's what Rabba says. I'm just going to give you the structure. What we're going to do right now until almost the end of Daf is show what are the sources for this, okay? What are the sources for this? First, we're going to talk about humans, and then we're going to learn from humans to animals as well. That this is not an issue. What's in, okay? That's going to take a while. At the very end, Rava, not Rabba, this is Rabba. Rava comes along and says to Rabba, why did you say this? There's an explicit Mishnah about tuma belua, and there's an explicit Mishnah about tahara belua. And he's going to quote two Mishnayot that basically say the same thing. And then we're going to end today's daf with the answer to that question is, what was Rabba adding that wasn't in those Mishnayot? Because Nemora doesn't need to say something that's explicitly in a Mishnah. That's the structure of the rest of today's daf. If only it were that simple. Okay, so let's get started. The question is, tuma belua minelam. What is the source for tuma belua? So again, we're on case number 1. I swallow something impure. It doesn't affect me. Now, obviously, when I swallow something impure, I become impure. So what does it mean it doesn't affect me? While it's inside, it doesn't affect me. Now, what's the source for this? A very basic source. Dichtiv. Va'ochel minivlata yichabes b'gadav. Okay, now, someone who eats a nivela, he has to wash his clothing, meaning he becomes impure, his clothes become impure. V'tamei ada erev. And he's tamei until the evening. Now, what does that mean? It means whatever time of day you did this, you then go to the mikveh at whatever point in the day, as long as it's before sunset. And then, when the sun sets, you're automatically pure. So comes the Gemara and says, you eat a nevela, what happens? Well, it's still in my body, right? So if let's say, Milo Askina, could it not be referring to a case? In other words, this includes any time of day this happens. So that means, theoretically, I could eat I could eat right before the sun sets, go to the mikveh, and I'll be pure right after that, even though I clearly have food in my body, which is a nevela. So what do you see? Tuma belua does not affect me. There's your proof. You get it? I have tuma in my body, impure food that's not fully digested yet. Could be barely digested. Okay? And it doesn't affect me at all. I'm pure now. I can go eat truma. If I'm a kohen, no problem. So, v'kamer rachmana tahor, right? The Torah says I'm pure. Clearly, what's inside me doesn't affect me. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. What is a ger here? Not a convert, the way we call converts. A ger is what we call a ger toshav. A ger toshav is like a ben noach. Okay, someone who keeps the noachide laws, who lives in the land. Now, why are they bringing up a ger, and what are they talking about? In a minute I'll explain. But it says in Devarim chapter 14, verse 21, don't eat any nevela. What should you do with it? Give it to the ger that dwells among you, meaning not a Jewish ger, but a non-converted, right, a ben noach, or, right, and he can eat it, or machor lenachri, sell it to a non-Jew. So what do you see here? In order for something to be a nevela, it has to be something that a ger can eat. Okay, now there's another pasuk about nevela that says, throw it to your dog. Okay, that's a different, now if we talk about, right, something that a person will eat is obviously not going to be something a dog will eat. A dog will eat even things lower down, okay, right, things that a person won't eat. But what they're basically saying is, maybe this food is different because it's already not, right, once I put food in my mouth, no other person's going to eat it. That's disgusting. So now it's true, it might be a dog could eat it, but a human would never eat it. So maybe that's why, in order for it to be a nevela, it needs to be, right, a nevela that can make me impure, it needs to be ra'oi for human consumption. And this is not open for human consumption because no human will eat it. So that could be the reason. So this isn't a good proof. The reason why the food inside me that's impure is because it doesn't actually carry impurity anymore because it's not edible by humans. Okay, well, that depends what you hold by. So hanicha le Rabbi Yochanan. Hanicha means, well, we could go back and use our proof if we hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Because what does Rabbi Yochanan say? Achadzo v'yachadzo. Okay, that means tuma chamur and tuma kala, meaning for this nevela to pass impurity to a person or a vessel, that's a higher level, or to pass on only to food, which would be if it's a rishon, pass on to a sheni. Okay, that's food. Okay, without getting too much into that, but either which way, ad lekelev. it's going to still carry on impurity, whether for higher level tuma, lower level tuma, until it's as long as it's fit for a dog. And this is still fit for a dog. So that would mean this still has impurity, and yet I'm not impure because I can go to the mikveh and be fine, even though I have this in my body. That would be then a proof for what we're looking for. The tuma belua is not a problem. Okay? But at Shapir, so that works. Ela lebarpada damar tuma chamura leger, but Barpada says, only he says, tuma kala ad lekelev. If it's the lower level tuma to pass on to food and drink, that's fine. It just needs to be ra'oi, that a dog can eat it. But the tuma chamura to pass on to a human, which is what we're talking about, has to be ra'oi leger, and then this can't prove anything. So that doesn't work. So we're back to a question. So they answer, Mishum de lo chazia. Sorry, this is the continuation of the difficulty. Mishum de lo chazia legeru. The reason why it doesn't make me impure is not because it's swallowed in my body and that doesn't pass on impurity. It's because it can't be eaten by a human. So they say, no. We can still use that as a proof, even according to Barpada. Why? Now, assuming the food didn't go down very much, okay, now, let's say I just swallowed it whole and I didn't chew it up. Now, in that case, if I were to spit it out, would you eat it? On what does it depend? Do you know it came from my mouth or not? On what does that depend? Did you see me eat it? If you didn't see me eat it, right, you won't know that I put it in my mouth. And you might eat it because you have no idea that it was already in my mouth, right? You only if you saw me. So that's what they say. It's not ra'oi for eating. No one would eat it if they saw me swallow it. But if you didn't see it, then actually it would be ra'oi for eating. You would eat it. So even according to Barpada, you could have a case where the nevela is in your body, could be eaten by somebody else. I could have gone to the mikveh and I'd still be pure, even though this is in my body, and this theoretically does carry impurity. So in the end, they do prove it from here, according to all the opinions, even though it's a bit of a weak proof at the end. Eshkachan tuma belua. Okay, so that covered stage one. If I swallow something that's impure, it doesn't make me impure, right? If I go to the mikveh, it doesn't mess me up if it's still in my body. What about tahara belua minalan? How do we know that if there's something in my body and I become impure, that what's in my body isn't affected by my impurity, right? I'm in a tent with a dead body. What's inside my body is protected. How do we know that? Well, this can be a little more complicated because you have to know another halacha. In laws of ohel, there's something called a kli cheres with a tzamid patil alav. That means an earthenware vessel that's sealed completely. Now, there's two different halachot here, the same two directions we're going in here, which is in tuma belua, it's the same in both. But in the tzamid patil, it's different. If I have something in this tzamid patil, let's say I have a cookie jar and there's cookies inside and it's a sealed cookie jar and there's a dead body in the house. So everything in my house, all the vessels become impure. But this earthenware vessel that's sealed shut, what's in it does not become impure. However, if there's a dead body or a kezayit of a dead body, more likely, in this vessel, and it's sealed shut, tuma goes everywhere. Okay, so if I'm in a house, whole house, everything is impure. Okay, it goes out, but it doesn't go in. Okay, that's what you have to remember. It goes out, it doesn't go in. Now we're looking for, how do we know it doesn't go in tuma belua, which is similar, right? It's the same kind of idea. There's something inside. So they say the following. It's a va-chomer from the kli cheres im tzamid patil. Ma kli cheres hamukaf tzamid patil she'eino matzil tuma shebetocho militameh. It doesn't protect here. Tuma's going to go out without a problem. Tuma goes completely out. Now, how do we know this? Because the Amar Mar tuma ritzutza bokat v'olad larakia. This is a very important halacha in laws of tuma. It's where we get like graves and stuff that kohanim can't go into cemeteries because the tuma goes up to the sky. Okay, this is where the issue of airplanes even going over cemeteries. So tuma in the ground, if there's now this is a whole different. Okay, if there's no halal of tefach, if let's say tuma's in a box and there's a space of a tefach, then the tuma's going to stay in the box. But if it's up to the top, there's no space, it goes straight up. From under the ground, it can go straight up. So from under the ground, it can go straight up. Also, from in this the earthenware vessel with the sealed cover, the tuma is going to go up also. Okay, so the tuma goes straight up, which means if it's in a tent, it's going to be impure. Okay, So, because tumah tzitzibo kav olah, that's how we know that the kli cheres with the tzami patil, still the tumah can go out. So when we're going up, right, out from the vessel, it's going to be impure. And yet, matzil al tahara shebetocho militamei, but the cover of this earthenware vessel actually protects from tumah going in. Okay, so while it doesn't work going out, it does work going in. So now you're going to see the obvious va-chomer turning now to amabet. Adam, now we just proved what? Tuma belua doesn't bother us. In Adam, tuma going out from inside his body doesn't go out, right? As opposed to the tzami patil where it does go out. When it's inside someone's body, the tuma doesn't go out, doesn't make the person impure. So Adam shematzil al tuma shebetocho militamei, the person prevents the tumah from getting out of his body. It doesn't go to his body even. So obviously, the Adam can protect the tumah from going in. Okay, it's very simple. If the tzami patil goes out but doesn't go in, then the place where it doesn't go out isn't good, right? Where it doesn't go out, it's not going to go in. Okay, that's the way they learn it. So once you have the first halacha, you can get to the second halacha through this va-chomer from the tzami patil. Now they try to question this, and they say, wait a minute. Va-chomer only works because we're going to say that tzami patil is more chamor. But now we're going to say, no, but the Adam is more chamor than the kli cheres. Why? Ma lekli cheres she'en mitamei migabo. Remember halachot of kli cheres? If I touch the outside of an earthenware vessel, what's inside doesn't become impure. But if I touch the outside of a person, let's say it's a carcass, touches the outside of a dead body of a live person, obviously it's going to make it impure, right? So you can say, kli cheres ein mitamei migabo. It's not mitamei in this way. Tomar ba'adam shemitamei migabo. But an Adam can be mitamei if someone touches it from the outside, which means that the laws of Adam could be more chamor than the laws of kli cheres. So we can't learn this va-chomer. Well, if in the more severe case of kli cheres, it's tamei and it's not mitamei going in, right? You can't, tuma's not going to go into that, whatever's in that vessel. You can't necessarily say, well, it's not going to go into what's in a human because a human has more severe halachot when it comes to touching them on the outside. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, no. You got it all mixed up. Atu ana migabo kamrina. We're not talking here about tuma that goes on the person's body on the outside. We're talking about tuma inside the body, right? Mitocho kamrina. And adraba, in the case of inside, humans are definitely less chamor than kli cheres, because what are the other laws about a kli cheres? Adraba, kli cheres chamor. Shekemi tamei me'aviro. Remember the halacha of a kli cheres? If I have something that's going inside and it just goes into the airspace, like let's say I have a dead sheretz, and it goes into the airspace of this vessel, that's going to be mitameh the whole thing, even though it didn't touch anything. Now with a human, it comes into my airspace, right? It's not going to make me tameh until it touches me. So you see, and what are we talking about here? We're talking about tumah inside. We're talking about tumah inside the vessel, inside my body. So for sure, the kli cheres is more chamor in that way, and that's why we can make a va-chomer. Okay, now here they get another. We're going to get into another va-chomer. This is a bit of a strange question. Eshkecham beluah dilamala. So now we're talking about, right? If the whole thing of tuma belua in both directions. Tuma belua, I swallowed something, or right, and it was tamei, or I swallowed something that was tahor, and I became tamei both directions. That's all beluah milamala. That means I swallowed it from up above, from my mouth. What if beluah de lamata minalan? How do we know that there's no tuma and beluah also if it came in through the rectum? Okay, a little gross. If something came into my body through the rectum, then how would I know also that there's no issue of tuma beluah? So the Gemara says again, va-chomer. It's very simple va-chomer reasoning. Malamala she'ein ose ikul. Now the top, if it goes in my mouth, it's not immediately digested. It's not the place where digestion happens, and yet matzil. And yet it's protected. Now, the more something is digested, the more you would think that it's something else, and it's not going to be mitameh anymore, or won't become tameh because it's not really an object anymore. And yet, even at the top where there's no digestion yet, it protects it. So lemata shows equal, right? Because in the bottom, in the rectum, everything comes out in a completely different manner than it came in. So, or at least many things do. Okay, we're going to talk later about a ring that's going to come out exactly as is. But since it's a location where in general things get very digested, wouldn't you think all the more so it would be protected? Because again, it's completely different than it was before. To which they say, what do you mean? How do things get digested? Not because it came through the rectum. The way to digest things, right? If you don't know this, which obviously you do, we also learned about it in all the, going through the gullet and going into the body of the animal and all that, right? So it gets digested by going in the mouth. So they say no. Still, the digestion that goes on near the bottom of your body is more significant. Okay, so that's an easy gzera shava, if not a little gross, but. Eshkacham belua de adam, belua de behema minalan. Okay, that all taught us tuma belua by a human, and as I said, now we have to learn to an animal. Again, va-chomer. Ma adam shemitami mechayim matzia bebelua, behema she'ena mitama mechayim eno din shetzia bebelua. Now, laws of impurity are much more severe by humans. Why? Because a human can become impure. All the time humans become impure while they're alive. If you remember, animals cannot become impure when they're alive. They're never impure when they're alive. Animals are only impure when they're dead because they're meat. They become food. But they can't become impure when they're alive. So what do you see here? If the Adam, which has a much more stringent status of tuma, because even when they're alive they become impure, and yet whatever's swallowed up inside them doesn't make them impure and doesn't become impure. If the person becomes impure, then all the more so about an animal that we should say the same. They say, what do you mean though? There's a chomer by an adam. Mal adam shekain tzarich shehiyah bebeit hamenuga. Okay, if you go into a leprous house, you become impure. An animal that goes in becomes impure. Okay, it's kind of like tuma ohel. But there's one unique law that's lenient by a human, which is any clothes he's wearing don't become impure right away. Only the amount of time it took for the person to eat a meal. Okay, a small meal. Kedech pras, we're going to see. But there you see, there's a leniency by humans. So maybe humans are more lenient when it comes to impurity. And then maybe the tuma belua is only by humans, not by animals. So tomar bebehema, she'ena tzricha sheyah bebeit hamenuga. If the animal's wearing something on it, we're going to talk about this in a minute, what exactly that is, but it becomes impure immediately. Okay. So now the Gemara says this is a ridiculous question, because behema de'ena tzricha sheyah bebeit hamenuga l'ma yochta. What are we talking about? What kind of clothes is the animal wearing? Animals don't wear clothes. Okay? It's lekelim she'al gabah. If the animal's wearing a saddle on it, or carrying something, or something that's on it that it's carrying. Well, guess what? Adam nami lo bai. In a parallel, and there's no parallel to a person wearing clothes to an animal wearing clothes, because the parallel case to the animal carrying something on its body would be the same halacha for a human. It's going to become impure immediately. How do we know this? Look at the Mishnah. Ditznan, the Mishnah Negaim, which is all about a leprous house and leprosy in general, says, Hanichnas lebayit hamenuga, if you walk into a leprous house, v'kelav al ktafav, if you're carrying your clothes on your shoulder, you're not wearing them, they're on your shoulder, v'sandalav v'tabaotav biyadav, this is the parallel by the animal, and your sandals are in your hand, or your rings are in your hand, this is all possible things you could be wearing. Hu v'hein tmei miyad, person and the vessels are immediately impure, which means that the halach is the exact same thing for the humans and the animals. Only if hayal lavush kelav, if you were wearing your clothes, v'sandalav b'raglav, your sandals were on your feet, v'tabotav be'etzbao, and your rings were on your finger, then hu tamei miyad v'hein torin ad shisheh b'chdei achila pras patchitin v'lo patzorim mesav ochel b'liftan. The person becomes impure immediately. The vessels that are on the person, all the clothes, are not impure until the person sits, okay, eats an amount. B'chdei achila pras, the amount of time it takes him to eat a small loaf. He eats a small loaf of patchitin, of wheat, because wheat takes less time to eat than barley, okay, bread made out of wheat, not barley, where the person is reclining and eats with a dip. Okay, the assumption is eating with a dip, like hummus or something, is quicker to eat than if you don't eat it dipped in something. So anyway, that's the amount that you need, but that's not comparable to an animal at all, in which case we can still make that va-chomer human to animal. Okay, that's all the source for tuma belua. We did tuma belua. What's the source? That if you swallow it and it's impure, it's not going to make you impure. That was from eating the nevela. Then we did, how do you know that if you become impure and something swallowed in you is not a problem? That we learned by a va-chomer from the tzamid patil, from the klicheres with the tzamid patil, where there the tuma goes out, it doesn't go in. So here if the tuma doesn't go out, then the tuma doesn't go in. Okay, then we said, how do you know about from the mouth and not, maybe going the rectum would be a problem, would be a problem? No, we prove from va-chomer. And how do you know also this applies to animals? And we prove that as well. So tuma belua is a thing in animals also. It's not impure at all. Now comes Rava. End of the sugya today. I'm a Rabba. Travayu tanani. Tuma belua tanina. Tara belua tanino. Rabba, why are you telling us this? It says it in a Mishnah. I don't need an Amora to go tell me something it says in a Mishnah. Tuma belua ditnan. Where does it say it? Now we're going to talk about a ring. Bala tabat me'a. You swallowed a ring that was impure. Tovel va'ochel b'trumato. You could go to the mikveh and eat truma without a problem, even though it's still in your body. That's tuma belua, right? What it would be if not that. Hiki'ah, if you spit it out or it came out of your body the other way, Time'a v'tima'ato. The tabat is still impure because it didn't get purified when you went in the mikvah, and it now makes you impure on its way out because it touches the body on its way out. Tahara belua tanina, where does it say that something impure, something pure inside you doesn't become impure by, if you were in a tent, let's say? It also says it in a Mishnah. Ditnan, it says in a Mishnah. These are second, where's the Mishnah? It's none. In mikvaot. Okay, this is in mikvaot. Bala tabat Torah v'nichnas la'oal hamet. Okay, you swallowed a tabat Torah, swallowed tabat that was pure, and then you went into an oil of hamet with a dead body in there. V'yizav v'shana v'taval, and then you did all the process. You did the sprinkling of the paraduma waters. You did it again. Day 3, day 7, you went to the mikvah. V'yikia, and then you spit it out. Harehi kamashaita. The ring is unchanged. It was pure before, it's pure after. Nothing was wasn't affected by anything. So here you see both these. Okay. Now we have a very simple line, which is subject of the whole beginning of the Gefet Shir today, because there's a big machloket Rashi Tosfot how to explain it. I'm going to explain it in the very simple way that Tosfot does. But know that there's a big machloket here, and you can listen to the Beyond the Daf Shir to hear it. Ki ka'ama Rabba. What was Rabba adding here? Rabba wasn't talking about the case you thought. Rabba was talking about Kigon shebalash shtei tabaot, echad tme'a ve'echad tohara. Delo matam yalat tme'a l'tohara. It's when someone swallows 2 rings. One is pure, one is impure. And we're talking about inside. Now, what's the difference? If something is inside me and I'm outside, right? In other words, I don't see what's inside me. It's kind of swallowed up inside me. But if someone swallows 2 rings and they're right next to each other in my body, do we say that one can make the other one impure? If I swallowed 2, one was pure, one was impure, when they're inside my body together, as opposed to, let's say, something inside my body and I'm outside, right? Those are 2 different things. If these 2 are together inside my body, then still the tame one isn't going to be tame the other, because things inside my body, there's no passing on of impurity. And that is what Rabba was trying to say, not like we understood Rabba in the first place. Okay? And then the way Tosa reads this is, yes, those Mishnayot are talking about tuma belua. This is a different level of tuma belua. Okay, a different part of it. Rashi claims that this is tuma belua, and that when we said in the Mishnah, that's actually not even called tuma belua. That's something else. Okay, those 2 Mishnayot that we just quoted. But that's a machlokah. That's already a side point. I want to stick with the main simple reading. So, and again, what's interesting, one of the really interesting things about Geffen, and I don't want to give away the punchline at the end, but what's really interesting is a fetus inside a woman's body, is that considered, some people say, oh, it's just part of the mother's body. It's not like a ring that she swallowed that's inside the body, right? How do we view that? It's a fascinating question, right? How do we view something that's inside someone's body, and do we distinguish between a fetus and between a ring? Anyway, but as I said, we're going to get to the connection to our sugya in the next daf. So what we did today, the first part of the day was understanding Rabbi Yishmael about the behema, bechla, chaya, chaya, bechla, behema, the 4 permutations and what the 4 ramifications of them are, and what the source was for that we can infer one for the other, where we see in Psukim where it's completely clear. And then we went to this Mishnah where we really just left the Mishnah aside about the fetus not making the mother impure, but yes, making the midwife impure, as opposed to the animal, which did even make the midwife or the shepherd impure. But here does make impure. But then we moved off of that. We got to Rabba about tuma belua and tahara belua, and how it's neither one is a thing. Sources for that, how we applied it to other cases, I just reviewed 3 minutes ago. And then Rabba's question, but doesn't it say it in the Mishnah? Why are you telling us this? And then we said, what was Rabba really talking about? 2 rings next to each other in someone's body. One impure, one not impure. Do they affect each other? And we'll continue with the sugya in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.